Hi, this is Dr. Cairns with a brief lecture for designing compensation and benefit systems, specifically establishing pay rates. For more detailed information concerning this, you should consult your SHRM module for compensation and benefits. So let's take a quick broad view of what we're going to talk about as it relates to establishing pay rates. This slide shows you that it really starts with some aspect of job analysis and then job evaluation to ensure internal equity as well as looking at external equity, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what that aspects of job analysis really entails. The same thing with job evaluation. And then we look at how we can group similar jobs into pay grades. So from that we establish a certain amount of jobs, and it can be a variety of different jobs, and we want to put those all into some kind of a structure related to pay. And then we're going to look at how do we then establish or determine grades or pay ranges that may be considered wage curves, and then how can we fine-tune those wage rates. So the first aspect is looking at how do we establish information, salary survey data relative to the jobs that we want to analyze and evaluate. And we can conduct what's called a price benchmark of jobs, benchmarking our jobs that are in our company that are similar to jobs that we can compare to other organizations that would substantially be the same job responsibilities. So you're comparing apples to apples. And then we're looking at other pieces of how we can then establish what are the market price wages for those jobs. And within that, usually about 20% of the jobs at a market value in order to see if they're competitive, as opposed to just relying on our benchmark jobs. So we want to look at establishing some other evaluations based on market prices for other wages associated with different jobs that may not be part of that benchmark. And then we look at benefits information as well. What's being offered, such as vacation time, health insurance costs, and other things. So the sources of this information can be coming from government surveys, can come from professional organizations, maybe using a consulting firm to help us. We can do our own research via the internet, and then using salary.com and other survey data that may be public information. Job evaluation. Essentially what we're looking at here is identifying what are we going to compensate this job for. What are the efforts that are put forth? What skills are necessary? How much responsibility is associated with it? What are the working conditions that are associated with the job? So those are the factors or the things that we want to evaluate. And we're going to evaluate those by ranking them, perhaps from high to low. So just for simplicity, let's look at a job ranking. Say that we start with the CEO being the top job, and then, not disparaging, but whatever the lowest level job in that organization might be. It could be the mailroom, it could be some other kind of level. Whatever it is, we then begin with the outer elements, and then we assign factors, points maybe associated with each one of those factors associated with those jobs. The effort that needs to be put forth, the skills, the responsibilities and the working conditions, all establishing some kind of a range. And that then results in a classification of jobs. And so we could have jobs that are different, but may all be ranked the same. That's how that can happen, through that point evaluation. And then we go on to creating pay grades, and how do we establish that? And again, this can be an extension of looking at, again, point methods, ranking methods, and classification methods. And what does that mean? Well, we can create pay grades based on a range of points that could be associated with the jobs that we've established. And then again, we can rank those jobs, and within that establish grades that will be associated with those rankings. And then classification method is essentially acknowledging the fact that we've got pay grades and they've already been created for us. And believe it or not, the federal government has what they call a classifier. So if you think and you know anything about the federal pay system, you'll know of GS ratings, a GS3, a GS5, a GS7. Those are pay classifications that are established for grades associated with that, and then they evaluate the qualifications of the individual and determine which pay grade they go into. So that's a classification method. So how do we price these jobs then? How do we establish what will be the wages that we will pay? And essentially what we're looking for is establishing pay rates for each pay grade relative to the points or the rankings that we've assigned for each grade based on our job evaluation. In that, we show some relationships between the value of the job as determined by our evaluation and then also the current average pay rates for that grade. And that means we're going to be looking at salary information that we'll obtain through various surveys. So establishing then what are the ranges and grades that are associated with those. And then we establish a wage curve, and we look at there's obviously ranges that will be paid in our survey. We'll see different ranges that will be established, and that can help us establish a minimum pay and a maximum pay for a particular job. And so here you have an example of how that may be. So you have the minimums again to the maximum. Sometimes these are associated with a midpoint or a quarter or a starting range as well. And then there's something called broad banding, and this is something where companies have gone, and you could see where you can compress on this slide. Grades 1 and 2 could be compressed into one broad band, the same with grades 3 and 4. And so they're expanding and making broader perhaps and giving maybe more flexibility, but it also when you come to administer pay within these broad bands, you have to also be conscious of pay inequities that could exist. So there's some advantages and disadvantages to this. Again, I mentioned the flexibility. It could also have for flatter hierarchies, being able to compensate for different jobs that may fall within a particular skill set area, promotes people wanting to learn and be more mobile, gives you again a broader range to be able to compensate people to progress. They're not you see the minimum gets lowered so they can come in at a lower range, give them an opportunity to grow above on the maximum side as well. But again, these broad bands can also create some issues with inequities that can occur. So there you have it, establishing pay scales and pay rates and pay ranges within an organization. For more information, review your SHRM module for compensation and benefits.